Good day, good people, and welcome back to my channel. If you're viewing my channel for the first time, welcome. And if you are a returning supporter, hey everyone. Today I just want to stop and talk to you guys briefly about breaking generational curses. You know, a lot of us talk about breaking generational curses, but do a lot of us really want to break those generational curses? Think about it. Has the generational curse stopped with your grandparents? Have it stopped with your parents? Or even has the generational curses stopped with you? That's why, choosing the right partner or choosing the right, mate is very important, because you have to realize, are you breaking generational curse with this person, or are you continuing the generational curses with this person? We as women have to really take note of the value in being with one man, because not only are you carrying a man's seed, you're carrying his legacy. If you're having children by multiple men, you have different legacies that you're running through your body, and that's a generational curse. I really want us to be aware, be conscious of what you're doing, because it's damaging us. And we go on all these platforms crashing out, talking about this person, the man this, or the woman that, when really our generation is messed up. The generation before us was messed up. And this is not coming down on anybody. I'm just addressing the things that I see. Your parents' parents, they've messed up to a degree. And your parents mess up to a degree, and then now you're messing up to a degree, and it just doesn't look good for us as a people. So how do we deal with these things? How do we address it? If you're in these marriages and you notice, the things that you don't like, you have to really have a conversation with your spouse and say, hey, we have been doing XYZ. Let's come to a common agreement where we can change this about ourselves. This is what I don't like that I do, that I want to change or put the time and effort to work on. Hey, where can I improve? At some point you got to have that conversation. It can be very uncomfortable, but at some point it has to be had, because we got to want to break these generational curses. To a degree, we are responsible for how these younger children are growing up. You see these children that act undisciplined because their parents was undisciplined. At some point we have to call it out and change. Nobody want to change, but at some point you have to want to change, not for only you, but for the people to come. Like, even ask yourself, can I break generational curses with this person? And if you know the answer to that, then you need to really reevaluate, what you're doing. At some point you have to think about, you're raising your children, you're raising your children's children. You set the foundation, pretty much. That's what I'm trying to say. You're setting the foundation of your lineage to continue. So you have to be really careful and mindful how you're raising your children. That is very important. We give our parents, the grace, because, they were learning, and you have to give yourself grace too, because you're learning too. But also you have to face reality. And if you didn't grow up with all the tools, at some point you have to either want to break that and learn and move in a different direction to where you're not passing down those generational curses, or you're going to continue to repeat that, and it's going to continue through your generation if you don't check that. Also, knowing who you are, where you come from is important. A lot of people, don't even know where they come from. A lot of people don't even know what tribe they're from. I couldn't tell you what tribe I'm from if I really want to be honest, because I don't know my parents. I don't know my grandparents. I don't even know where I come from. So that is a huge part of who you are. That is a huge part of who your children will become. That is a huge part of where your grandchildren will come from. So knowing that, you have to operate differently. I can honestly say, the older I get, the more mature I get, the more self-aware I get, the more I heal. I realize that I'm not made for everybody. My body is not made for everybody. You have to truly be selfish, almost to the point to where this is what I want, this is what I need. No, I can't go here, I can't go there. Because if you decide, oh, I want this guy, I want that guy, I want this guy, it's not gonna look good for your children, your children's children, and so on. You're gonna continue on that bad baggage. And a lot of times when we get into these relationships based on our generational curses, we're passing it down for the next generation to deal with it, and for the next generation to deal with it. So at what point do we say, hey, let's stop this? Yes, you grew up this way, I grew up this way. Let's meet each other where we at, and let's really take the time out to break these generational curses. Let's stop being emotionally unavailable. Let's stop being unintentional with building. Let's start being intentional. Let's start being involved in our children's lives. Let's start breaking these generational curses, because we're continuing it on and we don't even realize it. A lot of times we get into these relationships and we end up being a parent to our spouses, because the way they grew up, they miss certain pieces from where they grew up. You miss certain pieces from where you grew up. So now you become parents to each other, and that creates another generational curse. That creates barriers. That creates lost time that you have with rearing the children that you do have up, because you have to step in and fill that void. A lot of times we have to really be intentional when we get into these relationships, when we get into these marriages. We have to be really intentional and stop being selfish, because we're not just in this relationship for us. We're in this relationship for our children, our children's children, and the generation to come after that. A lot of times we don't even look at that. We're thinking about it one way. We're just thinking about it for ourselves, but we're not in this for just us. Y'all, let's be honest. You can only use, oh, I didn't know no better, or I was never taught. You can only use that for so long. At some point you have to say, hey, I didn't know this back then. Now I know Y, X, Y, Z, and this is how I'm going to move forward. We got to stop using that as a crutch, or as a way to not take accountability. At some point you have to want to change. At some point you got to want to stop passing that on. You can't say, oh, my father was never there, or my mother was never there for me, and this is why I don't know how to show up. This is why I don't know how to do this. At some point you got to say, hey, this is what I'm missing, and this is what I want to work on. And you got to execute it to a degree, because you're raising your grandchildren. You're raising your grandchildren's children. At some point you got to want to step up and make the changes that you need to. A lot of us are too old to not know how to love. A lot of us too old to not know how to show up emotionally. A lot of us are getting too old to not know the things that we need as humans even. At some point, you got to know, hey, this is what I'm missing. This is what I need to learn. This is what I need to work on. This is how I want to execute this. This is how I want to pass this on to my children. Because ain't no way we're passing down all these curses, but ain't nobody breaking none of them. At some point, you gotta want to do better. When you know better, you do better. But yeah, with that being said, y'all, I just want y'all to just really take the time out and really evaluate yourself and say, am I passing generational curse or am I breaking generational curse? You know, be real intentional with yourself and be intentional with who you're with. Be intentional with the children that you're bringing forth. If you don't know how to love, hey, start with the fruits of the spirits, because it starts with you as a person. You can't blame everybody else about how you turned out or how this and that. At some point, you got to take accountability and say, hey, I've been doing X, Y, Z, and this is what I want to work on, and this is what I'm going to do going forward. But y'all, that's all I had to say, y'all. If you like my content, please continue to like, share, and subscribe. Have a blessed day, guys.